I sent a harsh message to my unfaithful wife while she was at dinner with her lover in the opulent surroundings, the dim lighting, the gentle jazz music playing in the background. Everything appeared to unite to create the perfect backdrop for their secret affair. They were comfortably sitting at a secluded table, hidden from curious eyes, immersed in quiet laughter and enticing looks. It seemed as though the outside world did not exist for them. On my end, my world was shattering. The agony was profound. My heart thudded in my chest as if it wanted to burst, yet the chilliness controlled every move I made. I had meticulously planned that moment, managing every aspect while they, blinded by passion, believed they controlled the situation. The message I sent was not merely words on a screen. It was a declaration of war, a silent explosion that I knew would dismantle any trace of false joy they sought to create. The words, sharp as blades, hit their mark the instant she checked her phone. Her expression shifted dramatically. Her companion beside her froze as he watched her joy turn to dread. The evening, which had started as an ideal escape for them, was now spiraling into a chasm of harsh and unforeseen revelations. They were unaware that I had known everything, which, in fact, I had always known. But the true motive behind that message, was I merely retaliating against a betrayal, or was there more, something they could never foresee? The truth was that the game they thought they were playing was never really theirs to play, and the message I sent was merely the opening move in a game I was determined to win at any cost. When their world eventually crumbled, when the facade of joy completely disintegrated, there would be nothing but silence, and in that silence, a secret that only I knew. But what would occur when they uncovered the truth? New York is a city that never sleeps, but on that particular evening, the city's lights seemed even brighter, mirroring the intensity of the emotions in the air. In a luxurious loft overlooking Central Park lived Ethan, a middle-aged man who was successful yet had a lackluster look in his eyes. In business, Ethan was unbeatable. His investment firm had expanded massively over the years, thanks to his insight and almost icy determination. However, internally, his world had turned bleak, particularly in recent months. Claire, Ethan's wife, was almost his complete opposite in every way. With a free and youthful energy, she lit up any room with her lively presence. When they first met, Claire was an up-and-coming artist with a promising future in fine arts. Marrying Ethan provided her with financial security and a lavish lifestyle, but gradually, something was lost between them. Claire began to feel choked by Ethan's practicality, the absence of emotion in his talks, the nights he spent working late at the office. The initial passion faded into a tedious, predictable routine, and she found herself longing for more. It was during one of these solitary nights that Claire met Daniel, a young photographer who visited the same art galleries as her. Daniel was everything Ethan was not: spontaneous, entertaining, and vibrant. He could look past the facade that Claire displayed to the world. He could see the intricate and desire-filled woman hidden behind the ideal wife persona. The connection between them started innocently, with exchanged glances and discussions about art that stretched into the early hours. But soon, these casual meetings evolved into something deeper, something Claire knew she could not hold back. Ethan, on the other hand, who always had a sharp instinct for business, eventually saw this insight extend to his personal life. He started to notice subtle shifts in Claire's behavior. She became more remote, spent more time away from home, and when present, her thoughts seemed to be elsewhere. Contrary to Claire's assumptions, Ethan was not ignorant of these changes. He sensed the distance, but rather than confronting her, he chose to silently watch, analyzing every action as though it were a complex negotiation. The venue for Ethan and Claire's wedding was an opulent mansion in one of Manhattan's most exclusive districts. The modern-style apartment mirrored the life Ethan had created: orderly, elegant, yet somewhat hollow. The living room, a vast area with glass walls, provided a breathtaking view of the cityscape. Yet, despite its beauty, there was a detectable chill in the atmosphere, a void that no amount of designer furnishings or artwork could conceal. Silent meals, sporadic gatherings at social functions, and brief exchanges before sleep had become the daily norm that characterized their marriage, while Claire became more engaged with Daniel. Ethan buried himself in his work but kept a vigilant watch on the unfolding events. Claire and Ethan's apartment boasted advanced security systems, which Claire seldom acknowledged: hidden cameras, an array of sensors monitoring movement inside and outside. To an outsider, the loft appeared normal, unless one knew exactly where to look. Lately, Claire's trips had grown more frequent and extended. Ethan monitored these patterns closely, noting the times and locations she visited. The guise of the oblivious husband was just that, a facade. Ethan had contacts and assets Claire could not fathom, and when he started to suspect foul play, he promptly utilized each one, including private detectives, vehicle tracking devices, and covert software on Claire's phone. Daniel was cautious, but not enough. He and Claire met publicly, yet always sensed they were under surveillance, unaware that this was not mere paranoia. Ethan was always a step ahead. He was conscious of every step Claire took, every message sent, every falsehood spoken. The bond between Claire and Daniel deepened, evolving into more than just a distraction from reality. She found herself more entangled, attracted to the intrigue and ardor Daniel presented, something long absent in her marriage. Yet, guilt weighed on her. Ethan's icy stare, his measured words, his apparent obliviousness to the changes all made her question whether he truly was unaware or simply indifferent. Behind his composed facade, Ethan plotted his next move. He knew direct confrontation with Claire would prove futile. Instead, he bided his time, observing as the web of deceit unraveled. The harshness of his final message, sent during Claire and Daniel's dinner, was the culmination of weeks of icy, calculated preparation. Ethan was not impulsive. Every phrase in that message was crafted to strike Claire at her most vulnerable. As Claire increasingly succumbed to the allure of newfound love, Ethan readied himself for the inevitable fallout. He was not a man to leave matters unresolved, and unbeknownst to Claire and Daniel, their every action was being monitored and recorded. Ethan was poised, knowing that when he chose to act, there would be no escape. Claire and Daniel's routine started to feel like a slowly unfolding film, each meeting filled with tension, each touch a calculated gamble. The thrill of the taboo was undeniable. They carefully selected the places for their meetings, always opting for secluded spots away from Claire and Ethan's social networks. Daniel, ever cautious, chose to keep a low profile, selecting coffee shops in less crowded neighborhoods or art shows on the edges of Brooklyn where recognition was unlikely. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to conduct his life with the same methodical precision he utilized in his business. He devoted himself to work during the day, securing deals and conducting meetings, all while upholding the appearance of a man dedicated to his professional success. Yet, internally, he was aware that the real test awaited him at home. Claire's presence during their nightly gatherings felt increasingly absent, resembling a spectre roaming the home without truly inhabiting it. During one of their customary quiet dinners, Claire mentioned offhandedly that she had an important exhibition at a museum the following week. Ethan, without raising his eyes from his meal, simply nodded. He was aware that this event would serve as an ideal excuse for another rendezvous with Daniel, and silently, he began to strategize his next step. He had thoroughly examined every pattern, every exit, every pretext. He knew that on the night of the exhibition, Claire planned to meet Daniel, possibly even to break away from the stifling routine that encircled them. The week crawled by slowly and tortuously. Claire, increasingly entangled in the web of deceit she had spun, meticulously planned her meeting with Daniel, struggling to manage her anticipation. She fantasized about the moment she would break free from the gilded cage her life had become. Daniel, for his part, communicated his mixed feelings of excitement and apprehension. He was aware of the perilous terrain they navigated, but the allure was too compelling to resist. On the evening of the exhibition, Claire prepared with great care. She selected a sophisticated deep red gown, which she knew would capture attention, but also carried an undertone of rebellion she desperately sought in her life. Ethan observed her as she dressed, his gaze icy, absorbing every detail but never exposing the turmoil churning within him. He offered her a measured compliment on her striking appearance that evening. Claire returned a smile, though her gaze was preoccupied, fixated on the upcoming events. The exhibition was a triumph. Claire received accolades for her artwork, and amidst the hum of conversations and the clinking of champagne glasses, she sensed adrenaline pulsing through her veins. Yet, beneath her charming smile, her thoughts were singularly focused. Daniel awaited her outside, ready to whisk her away from those constricting walls. As the event concluded, Claire hastily bid farewell, claiming fatigue from the eventful evening. She informed Ethan she would head home early, and as usual, he expressed no objections, wishing her a good night. However, upon exiting the museum, Claire did not go home. Instead, she stepped into a taxi that delivered her directly to a restaurant tucked away on a quieter street in the East Village. Daniel was already there, seated discreetly in a corner away from other patrons. When she entered, he greeted her with a smile blending relief with passion. For a moment, time seemed to halt for them both, where only the presence of the other mattered. Claire sat down, her heart pounding, while Daniel held her hand under the table, as if that small gesture could shield them from the world outside. Meanwhile, Ethan had not departed the exhibition as Claire had. After bidding his acquaintances farewell with customary politeness, he set off in a different direction. He drove calmly through the city, the urban lights glinting off his car, his mind focused on the strategy he had formulated. When he reached the restaurant where Claire was with Daniel, he parked at a discreet distance, quietly observing the entrance. Inside, Claire and Daniel conversed in low tones, laughing over trivial matters and the absurdity of their separate existences. Claire shared how alive she felt with Daniel, an emotion she hadn't experienced in a long time with Ethan. Each tender word, each whispered vow, added another layer to the barrier she was constructing between her marriage and her new life. Then it occurred just as Claire leaned in to kiss Daniel. Her cell phone vibrated on the table. Claire hesitated, a sense of dread climbing up her spine as she reached for the device. Daniel saw the shift in her demeanor and frowned, concerned. She unlocked her phone, and the sight of the message made her heart nearly stop. It was from Ethan. The words, crisp and clear, sliced through the air like invisible knives. Shock surged through Claire's body, her complexion instantly turning ashen. Daniel looked at her, puzzled, trying to comprehend what was unfolding. The expression she returned was fraught with fear and desperation, emotions he had never witnessed in her before. The ambience around them seemed to solidify as the text on Claire's phone screen altered the trajectory of the night irreversibly. Ethan, from afar, was well aware of the effect his words would have, and as he anticipated the inevitable fallout, the realization that he maintained control brought a chilling grin to his face. The dynamics were set to shift dramatically, and what would remain for Claire and Daniel after that night was uncertain. The message Claire received seemed to halt time. The once cozy and intimate restaurant atmosphere morphed into a zone of silent tension. Ethan's words were succinct yet impactful. Claire read and reread them, a swell of panic rising in her throat. Daniel, seated across from her, noted the sudden transformation in her face and leaned in, whispering with concern, "What's wrong, Claire?" His voice was laden with worry. She didn't reply at once, her gaze locked on the phone screen, as though hoping the words would vanish, that all of it was merely a dreadful dream she would soon awaken from. However, the harsh reality displayed was undeniable, a harsh, painful truth she couldn't disregard. "He knows," Claire finally whispered, her voice trembling. "What do you mean he knows?" Daniel's expression tightened, his tone now laced with urgency. "What did he say?" Claire inhaled deeply, attempting to gather herself. There was no softening the blow of those words. They resonated in his mind, like a grim forewarning. With a look of despair, she handed the phone to Daniel, allowing him to read the message for himself. Daniel's face transitioned from confusion to shock, and finally to horror. The message left no space for ambiguity. Ethan knew everything, and more crucially, he was in command. The anxiety Daniel attempted to conceal was clear in his expression, and Claire felt the gravity of their predicament intensify. "We have to leave," now he urged, starting to rise. But Claire remained static, her hands quivering. His mind raced, trying to piece together how Ethan had uncovered their secret, how he could be so certain of their betrayal to act with such ruthlessness, and most alarmingly, what he might do next. "Claire, come on," Daniel pressed, more insistently this time, tugging at her hand. She finally stood, nearly stumbling over her own feet as they made for the exit. The air outside was oppressively heavy, hard to breathe. The New York night was brisk, and the silence of the streets starkly contrasted with the turmoil in their minds. They lacked a plan. They only knew they needed to distance themselves, hoping that some space might afford them time to strategize. But as they rounded the corner departing the restaurant, a familiar figure awaited them. Ethan stood there, bathed in the soft glow of a street lamp, hands in his pockets, his gaze unwavering. He displayed no surprise, no anger. Instead, his expression bore something infinitely more intimidating and unsettling: calm, the assurance of a man who had meticulously orchestrated every moment of this encounter. Claire halted abruptly, her legs faltering. Daniel moved forward as if to shield Claire, yet the reality was he was as uncertain of what to do next as she was. Ethan advanced towards them, and then, unexpectedly yet smoothly, he spoke. "I hope dinner was to your liking," his voice calm yet laden with biting sarcasm. Daniel gulped, his posture tense. He struggled to maintain his composure, but the weight of the situation was palpable. Claire, on the other hand, seemed on the brink of collapse, her eyes fixed on the man who, until then, had been her compliant husband. "Ethan," Claire began, but was abruptly cut off. No, Claire, he interrupted, raising a hand with a decisiveness she had not witnessed before. I've heard enough from you now, it's my turn to speak. The silence that ensued was overwhelming. Daniel glanced at Claire, but she appeared just as bewildered as he was. Ethan advanced another step, his gaze locked firmly on Claire, not wavering. You know, Claire, I always suspected something like this might occur, he stated, his voice gentle, contrasting with the harshness of his words. Not because you're a bad person, but because our relationship was deteriorating, and I, more than anyone, understand what it is to fail. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. There was something deeply unsettling about how Ethan spoke, as if he were narrating an inevitable event, one he had already come to terms with. But don't be misled, Claire, he continued, now turning his attention to Daniel, who recoiled slightly. When I realized what was happening, I decided I wouldn't be the victim. I've always taken charge of my own destiny, and this time was no different. Daniel attempted to interject, but his words faltered. Ethan's glare at him was filled with disdain, as if Daniel were merely a trivial nuisance. I tracked your every move, Ethan disclosed, his voice low but commanding. Every message, every encounter, every deception. And now here we are. You underestimated me, and that was the gravest error you could have made. The atmosphere felt oppressively heavy. Claire turned to Daniel, seeking some reassurance, but he seemed as disoriented as she was. There was no straightforward exit from this predicament, and Claire was aware that Ethan's subsequent actions could alter everything. I could ruin you this instant, Ethan declared, his tone cold. But what fun would there be in that? Where's the justice in such an act? Finally, Daniel found his voice, albeit tremulous. What do you want, Ethan? He asked, fear evident in each syllable. Ethan regarded him with a half smile, an expression that seemed almost empathetic yet carried a sinister undertone. I want you to experience what I endured, the betrayal, the pain, the humiliation. But I also need Claire to see it for what it truly is. Ethan explained, crossing his arms as though preparing to impart a crucial lesson. Claire's heart sank. What was he planning? What more could he know? Then, with a dreadfully calm demeanor, Ethan extended his arm, displaying the screen of his cell phone. It was a video, a recording of a night Claire had believed would remain hidden forever, a lapse in judgment she had repressed, known only to Ethan. I'm not the only one you betrayed, Claire, Ethan stated sharply. But I'm the one you should never have underestimated. Shock washed over Claire's face, and Daniel stared at her, bewildered and appalled. The revelation struck them like a physical blow, one they were unprepared to confront. Ethan, observing their stunned reactions, simply turned to walk away, leaving them to grapple with the harsh reality he had unleashed. Enjoy the night, he remarked without looking back. With those words he vanished into the shadows, leaving Claire and Daniel alone with the wreckage he had left behind. Claire stood motionless, feeling as if her world had fractured into 1,000 shards around her. Daniel stared at her in disbelief, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what had just occurred. Ethan's disclosure had hit them like a landslide, obliterating any semblance of control they might have imagined they had. Claire, what was that? Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. He was at a loss, unable to grasp the magnitude of what he had just witnessed. She didn't answer immediately, tears pooled in her eyes, but she couldn't weep, not there, not yet. He needed time to digest everything, to understand how swiftly his life had unraveled. I don't know, Claire whispered, her voice cracking. Yet deep down, she was aware he fully grasped the implications of what Ethan was suggesting, and fear engulfed his heart. Daniel, however, deserved to know the whole truth. Daniel, I didn't want it to end up like this, she started, struggling to contain the tears that threatened to spill. I made a mistake, a significant mistake, long before I met you. Daniel scowled, attempting to unravel the tangled emotions emanating from Claire, her fear visible in his eyes, the remorse audible in her tone, all indicating that the issue was far more substantial than he had anticipated. I was lost, Daniel, she confessed, tears now streaming down her face. Before all of this, as she paused, swallowing hard. I was unfaithful to Ethan, but not with you, with someone else, and I never told him. Daniel felt as if a frigid wave had crashed over him. He stared at Claire, trying to reconcile this revelation with the woman he thought he knew. Part of him wanted to flee, to dismiss it all as a nightmare, but another part recognized the complexity of their situation. Does he know? Daniel's voice quavered. He found out, but never confronted me, Claire responded, the words emerging with difficulty. I thought it was buried, that I'd never have to face it again. But he knew all along. Daniel shifted back slightly, trying to process it all. The betrayal he assumed was just between them now appeared to be merely the tip of the iceberg. Ethan knew far more, and he was wielding that knowledge to manipulate them. "Claire, what does he want with all this?" Daniel finally asked, desperate to understand the web they were caught in. "I don't know," Daniel, Claire admitted, her voice filled with despair. "But one thing is clear, he won't stop here. Ethan isn't the type to forgive or forget. He will do everything to ruin us." Her words lingered, charged with escalating terror. Daniel, who had once believed he could manage the situation, now felt utterly powerless. Ethan was not merely a wronged man, he was a calculating adversary, and they had unwittingly played into his hands. Daniel's phone vibrated, shattering the tense silence. He grabbed it with trembling hands and looked at the screen. A new message, this time addressed to him, from Ethan. Upon reading it, Daniel's blood turned ice cold. "Now it's your turn," Daniel, the message read. "Let's see what you're truly capable of when you're not with Claire. Let's see if you can endure the same torment I did." Daniel glanced at Claire. The desperation in their eyes was stark. Ethan was not merely seeking simple revenge, he was prepared to push them to their limits, and every move they made was now under his control. The game was far from over, and Ethan's future actions promised to be even more catastrophic. Suddenly, the gravity of their situation felt overwhelming. Daniel knew they had to decide swiftly before Ethan advanced further. But what decision to make? They were at a dead end, facing an adversary who understood their vulnerabilities better than they knew themselves. And so, a night that began with hopes of a new start had spiraled into a nightmare from which they could not awaken. However, one thing was clear: the climax of this cruel game was yet to come. They would have to confront the consequences of their actions, each move intricately orchestrated by Ethan. What followed would be a battle not just for their relationship, but for their very survival. Silence descended between Claire and Daniel as they stood on the sidewalk, still reeling from the revelations that had struck them with the force of a storm. Each grappled with how to navigate the new reality that now enveloped them, burdened by the overwhelming weight of the choices they had made. The streets of New York, usually so vibrant, now seemed eerily deserted, mirroring the emptiness spreading within them. Daniel was the first to break the silence, his voice a mix of determination and despair. "Claire, we can't just stay here waiting for him to ruin us. We need to act." His mind raced for solutions, but everything felt futile against Ethan's calculated manipulation. "And what can we do?" Claire replied, her voice quivering, still overwhelmed by fear. "He knows everything, Daniel. He holds all the cards, and we have no idea what he plans to do with them." Daniel shook his head, frustrated. Accustomed to control, this helplessness gnawed at him, yet even faced with adversity, a part of him refused to accept defeat. "We need to confront Ethan on his own terms," Daniel declared, his voice firm despite the fear evident in his eyes. "We can't just wait for his next move. We must find a way to change the course of this." Claire looked at him, her eyes reflecting a new understanding. What Daniel proposed seemed insane, but the alternative, simply waiting for their inevitable downfall, was far worse. She knew Ethan would not stop until they were completely destroyed, and the idea of passively awaiting that fate was intolerable. "But how, Daniel?" she asked, seeking some rationale in the chaos. Daniel sighed deeply, the burden of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. They needed to be strategic, not impulsive. Ethan was shrewd, but his arrogance, his overconfidence in his manipulative abilities, might be his downfall. "If we can identify a vulnerability, a weakness, perhaps we can turn the tables," Daniel mused, slowly, ideas starting to take shape. "We need to think like him. We need to uncover his real objectives, what he truly desires from us, and then use that against him." Claire considered Daniel's words. Facing Ethan at his own game was daunting, yet it was the only option they had left. She couldn't undo the choices she had made, but perhaps she could influence the outcome. "Do you think we can deceive him?" Claire asked, her voice now tinged with cautious hope. "It won't be easy," Daniel conceded, "but it's our only option. Ethan believes he's in full control, but he doesn't anticipate us fighting back. If we play our cards right, we might change the situation before he knows what's happening." Claire nodded, a renewed determination kindling within her. Fear lingered, but now there was also a spark of resistance, a resolve not to go down without a struggle. "Let's discover what he wants, Daniel," she said, her voice growing stronger. "And when we know, we'll turn it against him." They exchanged a glance of mutual understanding. There was no room for doubt or regret. Now they were in a do-or-die situation and had to navigate it with minimal harm. The decision was made: they would confront Ethan directly, but with the aim to outsmart the mastermind. The moral quandary they faced was intricate. They had to delve into the same deceptive tactics they detested in Ethan. They had to choose between staying true to their values or descending into the same depths of lies and manipulation. But one thing was evident: retreating was not an option. With this resolve, Daniel and Claire began to strategize their next moves, conscious that each decision was critical as the night progressed. They realized that the ultimate showdown was imminent, potentially the final act in a perilous game they were playing. The confrontation would unfold quietly, nearly imperceptible to outsiders. Ethan, always a step ahead, patiently awaited Claire and Daniel's move, confident that desperation would drive them into action. Yet, what he had not anticipated was the audacity with which they would face the challenge. Claire and Daniel, recognizing they were at a pivotal moment, made a daring choice. To outmaneuver Ethan, they had to risk it all. They began orchestrating their strategy with near-surgical precision, manipulating information, crafting diversions, and instilling doubt. Ethan, confident he was in command, failed to see the shifting dynamics around him. On the decisive night, Claire arranged to meet with Ethan at his loft, asserting she needed to discuss things and was ready to confront the aftermath of her actions. With his sense of dominance, Ethan accepted, believing he was on the verge of perfecting his revenge. Upon Ethan's arrival at the loft, the air was thick with tension. Claire awaited him with a calm, almost resigned demeanor, but there was an unrecognizable spark in her eyes. Daniel was not visibly present, which Ethan assumed, but in reality he was closely monitoring the situation, poised to intervene at the crucial moment. "Ethan," Claire began, her voice gentle yet assertive, "I know we have inflicted terrible things upon each other, but I cannot bear this burden any longer. I'm ready to conclude this once and for all." Ethan, confident, moved closer to her. "Finally, Claire, I knew you would come to this realization. I always knew there was no escape for you." But before he could continue, Claire stepped back and swiftly grabbed something from the table, a recorder. She turned it on before Ethan could react. His own voice filled the room, broadcasting every calculated plan, every threat he had made against Claire and Daniel, captured perfectly on tape. For the first time, Ethan was caught off guard, realizing he had underestimated Claire. "What did you do?" Claire, Ethan growled, his anger mounting. "Just what you would have done," Ethan, Claire responded, her tone now more decisive. "I used your own strategies against you. The game has changed, and you are no longer in charge." At that moment, Daniel entered the room, his gaze resolute, holding his phone ready to distribute the recordings to the police and Ethan's legal team. Ethan understood that if those recordings got out, his career and reputation would crumble. "There's no escape for you now," Ethan, Daniel declared. Moving closer. "You backed us into a corner, and now it's your turn to face the consequences." As the reality sank in, Ethan felt the foundations of his world falter. Trapped, he realized Claire and Daniel had masterfully reversed their fortunes at the last moment. "Do you think you've won?" Ethan said, clinging to a shred of defiance. "This isn't over yet." Claire looked at him, her eyes icy and resolved. "It's over, Ethan," she stated, shutting off the recorder and storing it away. "The only thing left for you is to accept defeat." Realizing he was outmatched, the full weight of his precarious situation struck Ethan hard. He was about to lose everything, not just due to his deceit, but because he had underestimated those he sought to dominate. Faced with inevitable defeat, Ethan made a final decision that would define his destiny. In a swift motion, he turned and exited the loft, leaving Claire and Daniel behind. That night, Ethan vanished, leaving behind a terse message in his office, resigning his position and transferring all his assets to Claire. Claire and Daniel, though liberated from Ethan's manipulation, recognized they could never return to their former lives. The betrayal, manipulation, and psychological games had left profound scars. Instead of dwelling in regret, they chose to advance separately, each gaining a deeper appreciation for living with the consequences of one's decisions. Ethan, meanwhile, disappeared from the public eye, becoming a specter haunted by his choices. His story served as a warning that true power comes from recognizing when control is lost. The game had ended, but the lessons learned on this treacherous path would endure. Thus, the city of New York continued to thrive, oblivious to the personal dramas that had unfolded within it, as the characters moved on, bearing the burden of their past actions and holding on to the hope of a better, albeit uncertain, future.